this is Kelsey and welcome to another episode of Complaining About Things Riot Does. Not really. I actually don't have that much of a problem with the Riot Games switching the North American League of Legends Championship format back from best of 3 to best of 1, which if you haven't read the title or the description, that's what this video is about. I can understand where they're coming from in terms of viewership, in terms of the split screen stream not really being sustainable, and them wanting to have like more excitement that comes from a punchy best of 1. A lot of casual fans have expressed that they felt like best of 1 was more exciting and more fun, and that they don't necessarily have time or the interest in investing in a best of 3, so maybe this actually does help with the viewership. I should get over the fact that I really like competitiveness and understand that this is an entertainment industry that's run by people who like to watch the games or who enjoy it, and the large proportion of the audience probably just are kind of like, yeah, I'll watch a single game, but I'm not that, but if I can't watch every single game from my favorite team, for example, maybe I just don't feel like there's an incentive to do so. So I'm okay, I'm on board with Riot doing this, or at least wanting to try it, as long as that they keep an open mind if it doesn't work and they're willing to go back to a different format or try something else. What I'm personally more interested in is what the exact difference is between the competitive side of best of 1 and best of 3, and whether or not I think the move to best of 3 is extremely competitively damaging. Obviously, I'm in it more because I like to see the best teams do the best things, and I want, in general, the global scene to level up, including North America. I know you're shocked, you don't actually believe me, but trust me, I do. So, from that perspective, I'm really curious because I do feel fundamentally that there are different skills that are valuable for international competition and just competition in general. The best of 1 and best of 3 emphasize, and we've actually seen this sort of development, and teams that are winning NA LCS are having the skills that are good in best of 3s, which are like adaptation and stuff like this, but not necessarily exercising the skills that make them really good at BO1. Now, initially when Riot Games moved to BO3 in North America and BO2 in EU LCS, I think it was really motivated by teams, which I kind of already said a little bit, and some of the reasons that they gave was avoiding cheese strategies or just like being unprepared for a pick and having a single pick decide whether or not you get a point or not. I think that that was probably accurate for them, saying that this doesn't necessarily tell you if a team is good or bad or which teams are better, and ends up not necessarily giving you an overall picture of who the strongest teams are in the league if you just have best of 1s that way, and some people are on board with a pick at a certain time and other teams aren't. Others said that like emphasizing adaptability was something that Korean teams really had over North American and Western teams. Like maybe North American and Western teams could take a game here or there in their minds, but they would never be able to really match Korean teams in their adaptability, and so being able to like say, okay, we made a mistake here, what can we do to go into game 2 is something that they really needed practice for. And another one is just like increasing the number of games you played, so you're playing more games on stage, because stage games are just much more valuable overall than scrims or online games or anything like this. So all of these were kind of the competitive reasons for moving over to best of 3. First of all, let's talk a little bit about whether or not we feel like teams have actually gotten better at these things. Now, I do think in general best of 3 is probably going to give you the better team winning, and because of the very reasons, like you can't necessarily get away with cheese as much if you have a tech advantage. I refer to it as a tech advantage, which is just like insider knowledge of whether or not something is good on a patch right away. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be the better team. I do, however, still feel like the skill is important, right? It's actually really important that you get it right the first time. Like that's something that should be rewarded. It's not just like a one-off thing, but if you find something that's really strong, or if you're good at executing it right away, then I feel like you should get something for that. Like that should be something that people see. And right now, the way that the LCS is set up with best of 3s, I don't really feel like in regular season you get rewarded for being that as much, and it's de-emphasized. It's not considered as good of a skill. Team Solo Mid, famously, in 2016 spring, lost 10 game 1s. Of their 18 series they played, they won 15, but they lost 10 game 1s. So, one thing Parth said about that, right, in an AMA, was that he felt like the reason why they did this is because they wouldn't necessarily have the best idea of what was good on a day or what the enemy team was good at on a day, but they were really good at identifying it after losing the first game and then adapting and doing well throughout the rest of the series. I think this kind of behavior actually made teams like Team Solo Mid and G2, winners of the Western Leagues, right, bad at international competition, because even if you're super good at this sort of adaptability, you don't get out of group stage, and you can't really prove that you're good at adaptability if you don't get out of group stage. And G2 and TSM have historically had some of the worst group stages. And obviously this is a small sample size, so we don't necessarily know if it's just a coincidence, they get bad draws, whatever, or G2 maybe were just bad until this year. But we do know that there is some consistency with how they perform at international group stage, and the fact that they lose first games. G2 also lose first games to like NIP, Vitality, teams like this, and then are really good at adapting. We're really good at adapting in the Splice series, for example, and moving up from there. So I think best of 3 did change a little bit of what teams were emphasizing or what teams were focusing on, and it made some of the best teams better at adapting, right? And having the best tech or figuring out the patch in scrims or anything became less important to me. And I think that maybe to an extent de-emphasized prep a little bit. I obviously am not accusing teams of not preparing. I still think teams prepare a lot and they have a really good idea in their head of what's going to be important going into a game. And then obviously, like, if it doesn't work the first time, another layer of prep is having backups or having something like this. But I think that you also see teams that have an ideal of the perfect game or the perfect setup succeed a lot more in first games or succeed a lot more in best of ones. Like, for example, H2K went furthest of any EU team. Obviously, maybe they had an easier group, but they upset EDG, for example, which was considered a strong game. And they've always been the team that I think comes with like some sort of platonic ideal about what's good. And so they're really good at first games. They're really good at like knowing what's good from off the bat, but it's more adapting that gets to them. And so they were really good in the BO1 setting. Obviously, I think both of these skills are important. And that's why I advocate for BO2, because BO2 I feel is probably the best format that emphasizes both things, right? It emphasizes the BO1 skill, which is getting things right on the first time, because you get a point for that. You get a point for winning the first game. You get a point for winning the second game, which is being good at adaptation, coming back when you've lost and doing that well. If you can do both, it is the only format that gives you an extra reward for being able to do both. If you just completely stomp and are good at both sides of this type of format situation, of coming prepared on the day with the best stuff and being better than everyone else right away, that's rewarded. If you're good at adapting and changing things up if you make a mistake, or if they make a mistake, or if just like having a second thing that you can come to and they adapt, and then you also adapt really well to that, then you get rewarded for both with an extra point in a BO2. And that's why I think it's really the best format in terms of just regular season play. Obviously, best of 5, you know, over time, you really want to emphasize this adaptability scale. You really want to see which team is better, because I think that ultimately the team that wins the more games over time in head-to-head is the better team. So longer series are going to say who the better team is, even though they de-emphasize a little bit that come to play first game sort of skill. But best of 2 emphasizes both during the regular season. You get points for both, you have balance on blue and red side, so that's why I've always like felt the best of 2 is sort of the best format. I've been consistent with this, and you know, when you come to Kelsey's page, like Riot might change their mind, but you kind of know what you're going to get from me at this point. So I think that that's a really interesting trade-off from best of 1s and best of 3s that isn't really discussed as much, because people kind of assume that if you're good at best of 3s, you're going to be somewhat good at best of 1s, but I just don't think that we have seen that at all. And obviously, LCK teams are good at both, right? They found ways to be good at both. They don't necessarily play best of 2s anymore, but I think that historically in their format, something that pokes holes in the more is better argument, which is the third reason I think was a motivating factor for switching to best of 3s, which is just like more stage games will give us more experience and more ideas. It's just that LCK used to have an OGN Champions format, which you play like 3 best of 2s as your group stage or regular season, and then you have the bracket stage with just best of 5s, right? You had this dragged out throughout a course of period of time because that gave you a lot of space between each set to really emphasize how important each game was going to be and to become really, really prepared. So I actually felt like the thing that made these teams better at the time was prep. It wasn't necessarily that they play more games because they didn't. And then they switched to best of threes and everyone decided, okay, more games is more important without necessarily looking at this history. But when you're able to prepare really well, you're able to make sure you have your adaptation sorted and you're able to make sure that you know what's good on the day. So I think that's important. One of the arguments that people have said and that Riot has acknowledged is that if you are playing fewer stage games, then maybe you're just less competitive. And part of the reason people feel like this, that stage experience is so much more important, is because we've seen and we've heard time and again that stage games are way different from scrims and online play. And of course, like, there's a difference in pressure and everything like this, and people try to build up, recreate stages in their own training rooms and their own environments, but I really just don't think you can fundamentally replicate the feeling of a stage in practice, and I don't think you should strive for it, because I think what scrims give you that stage games don't is an ability to push your limits, an ability to try things out, and you come in with scrim goals that aren't necessarily consistent with winning every game. For example, say you're really bad at this level 6 bot lane dive. So you want to do a scrim block where you just dive bot at level 6 every time because you're screwing it up in your stage games, and so you want to be able to have the ability to practice it in scrims, even when maybe it doesn't necessarily make the most sense every single time, but you want to just really get this down. You don't really have the luxury of doing that on stage if stage games matter, so I don't think that scrims should be an exact replica of stage games. I don't think they should, and I think that teams that sort of try to make scrims an exact replica of stage games might be missing out. So anyone who says that, like, you can catch up on missing BO5 or BO3 practice by just really playing a ton more scrims, or just like do scrims that are like stage games, I think are kind of missing the importance of the distinction between the two. So I can understand where people are coming from, and I do think that there should be an ability to practice adaptation on stage that will be lost out from the BO1. And again, this is why I think BO2 is the best solution, but of course people don't really like it. A lot of people see that there's a loss of feeling of finality and a loss of feeling of success, and like the story is completed, and I can kind of understand where they're coming from. I do think that more work can be done to frame best of twos in a narrative way. For example, like, if the casters feel one team played this really well, like, can we increase excitement about, well, this team actually feels better in the way that they won this game or the way that they lost the other game. So even though it was a tie, like, we feel really strongly about this, and then this creates hype for their next encounter later on and everything like this. So I feel like there are ways that you can narratively frame BO2 so that they're more exciting. But I understand, like, okay, right now we're going to go back to BO1. It's lower commitment, it's everything else. The one thing I am concerned about, however, the really big thing I'm concerned about with this in terms of the viewership side is the message that Riot are, to an extent, sending when they made this post, which is that one question that they asked kind of was, is there an oversaturation of esports content that's making fans choose between watching the LCS and playing League of Legends? Now, the reason why I have a problem with this is, of course, like, it goes back to the age-old conflict of interest argument where Riot shouldn't necessarily be running their own league, because obviously if you're running your own league, you're running it as a marketing tool for the game to try to drive people to the game. And we've seen hints of this throughout the history of the LCS's existence, where Riot has decided, you know, we're removing lane swaps or the ability to lane swap, or we're de-incentivizing lane swaps because we want, you know, viewer games to feel like home games, so that if you're watching something cool on stage, you feel like playing the game, right? This is what Riot want to create. I think that this is just kind of misleading and fundamentally just, like, incorrect with how people experience esports and with how people experience the game, because a lot of people who really enjoy and get into esports, like the core audience, the core fan base, aren't necessarily going to be the ones that enjoy playing as much, because they like the difference in how the games are being played out on stage and in the LCS, and how games are being played at home. They like the difference. They like the high level of communication and excitement and teamwork and the feeling of bonding like that they get by watching this and, like, seeing this sort of payoff on stage and all of this hard work and this difference in something that they personally haven't achieved in this aspect of the game. Maybe they've achieved it in something else in their life, but they want to feel that excitement. They want to feel connected to that, and maybe some of them like the high level or the difference and everything like this, and this isn't something you're going to get in your solo queue game. So I think there is a fundamental difference in what kind of sensibility and what kind of entertainment esports appeals to and playing the game yourself appeals to. I don't think that they're all that similar. Obviously, there are overlap, and a lot of people who are into League of Legends were originally fans of the game. Like, a lot of people who are into esports gaming were originally fans of playing the game themselves. You sometimes have the reverse happen, especially with esports getting bigger, where maybe you were a big CSGO person and you enjoyed the CSGO esports scene, and then you got into the League of Legends esports scene and started playing the game that way. So sometimes that happens, but I think necessarily there is, like, you end up developing some kind of preference for one, and you will want to be more inclined to devote your time to one or the other. And I don't think that that's necessarily anything wrong with that. And I don't know if Riot are aware of this, or if Riot are thinking about the difference in, like, what sort of gratification you get from playing versus the gratification you get from watching someone else play. And I feel like they need to stop really kind of ramming and hitting this home. And I understand esports is still like a marketing venture for them, but they should probably more often acknowledge that there are differences in the core esports audience and the core League of Legends audience. And I feel like they haven't done that. So that's one of my biggest hesitations about this announcement and the way in which it was made. Overall, I'm not overly critical of Riot's decision here. I, of course, would rather see BO2, but I can see ways in which BO1 will emphasize different aspects of competition that can still be really good and still be really rewarding, and ways in which BO3 emphasized it. And sometimes I feel like, to an extent, like with the more is better argument, we were kind of switching to BO3 maybe for some of the wrong reasons. So it might not be the end of the world from a competitive standpoint that we're switching back to BO1.